There are faces that make history, not because they were born for it, but because they fought their way into it. And then there's Whoopi Goldberg, a voice that didn't just echo on stage or screen, but thundered across every room it entered. From the projects of Manhattan to the bright lights of Hollywood, she carved her legacy not with favor but with fire. Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. The EGOT crown, worn by only a chosen few, rests on her head like a scar turned metal. Because her story was never about triumph alone, it was about surviving what no one saw coming. Now at 70 we see the laugh still warm, still sharp, and forget what that laugh once had to silence. Behind her candor is something heavier than fame. Grief, a weight of personal loss, shattered love, battles with illness, and a public that watched more for the stumble than the climb. This isn't just the story of an icon, it's a chronicle of a woman who outlasted storms by walking straight through them. Long before the curtain rose and the cameras rolled, there was Karen Elaine Johnson. Born in 1955, inside the crumbling halls of the Chelsea Elliott houses in Manhattan, she wasn't born with a silver spoon, she was born with an empty table. Her father vanished early, a ghost in every family photo, and her mother Emma stretched herself thin just to keep the lights on. A nurse, a teacher, a warrior in a uniform of exhaustion. There was no room for dreams when survival took every square inch. In those gray stairwells where hope rarely lingered, Karen, later Whoopi, learned that the world owed her nothing. Kids at school didn't tease her for being loud, they mocked her for being lost. Dyslexia, undiagnosed and unspoken, turned learning into torment. She didn't hear praise. She didn't collect gold stars. She heard she was dumb, broken, a problem better left behind. At 14, life changed, and not in the way it should. A pregnancy, a secret, a choice made in desperation. She turned to whatever risky word-of-mouth remedy she could find, and nearly lost her life trying to unmake a moment that had arrived too soon. She lived through it, but not without scars. Physical, emotional, invisible. A year later she faced it again, only this time, the law had changed, and the care she received saved her life. It marked a beginning of a truth she'd speak forever after. No girl should ever be that alone. At 16 she walked away from school. No cap, no gown, just silence. Society already branded her a dropout, a single mother without a future worth betting on. But inside her was something they couldn't grade on a test: persistence. A marrow deep voice that said, "Keep going. There's still more." She ran west, hoping the sky would offer something the skyline never had. Her feet landed in San Diego, then Berkeley. No glamour met her there, just hard years. Bricklaying jobs that turned her hands raw. Waitressing gigs that left her with little more than aching feet. She worked in funeral homes, painting strangers to look alive again. She said later, "I touched death before anyone knew my name." And when life didn't open doors, she broke through windows, teaching acting in run-down community centers, writing monologues that spoke the pain she didn't know how to say out loud. She used comedy as camouflage, a way to laugh through what hurt too much to cry about. In the back of clubs, in basements lit by flickering bulbs, she shaped characters that came from her blood. Dysfunctional moms, addicts, outsiders, every one of them a whisper of her own story. In 1978, a plane crash above her San Diego neighborhood carved a new kind of trauma into her skin. Metal hit sky, fire rained from above, and for the next 13 years she couldn't fly. Panic attacks replaced travel. She crisscrossed the country by bus, miles of sleeping alone, staring from windows while others soared. One day, a contract came. A flight became the only path forward. She boarded, she buckled in with trembling hands. It wasn't bravery, it was survival with a seatbelt. And then, finally, the world started to listen. But the applause that came later could never erase the road that brought her to it. Not the poverty, not the addiction, not the broken love, the loss, the near-death moments, and certainly not the soul-altering grief waiting further down her timeline. Because legends aren't just born, they're broken. Then they rise. By the early 1980s, the world was still asleep to Whoopi Goldberg. But in the shadows of underground theaters and dusty rehearsal rooms, something unshakable was forming. Her pain had crystallized into performance. Her rage had found rhythm. In 1983, She pulled every chapter of her life, every wound, every sarcasm, every street corner observation, and poured it into a one-woman show. It wasn't just comedy, it was testimony. A raw, electric, soul-bearing kaleidoscope of characters who wore her trauma like second skin. Audiences didn't laugh because it was funny. They laughed because it hurt. The show became a cult phenomenon. New York took notice. Broadway answered next, and suddenly, the underdog had center stage. Out of 156 sold-out performances came something greater than applause. Steven Spielberg saw her. And in 1985, he did what very few were willing to do. He cast an unknown black woman, not as a sidekick or comic relief, but as the beating heart of a major motion picture. Celie in The Color Purple was not just a role, it was Whoopi's soul on screen. Every lowered gaze, every strained whisper, every moment of defiance. It was the little girl from the project stepping from silence into voice. She didn't need to act pain. She remembered it. Her performance earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Actress. The world finally knew her name, but the fame that followed didn't ease the echoes. It amplified them. Beneath the designer gowns and polite laughter, something fragile stirred. Could she really carry this? Was greatness ever meant for someone like her? Just as those questions began to claw at her again, the universe brought her a second answer. In 1990, Ghost launched Whoopi into a different kind of orbit. No more quiet suffering. This was Whoopi Goldberg at her freest, unfiltered, riotously funny, yet heartbreakingly human. Her portrayal of Oda Mae Brown wasn't just entertainment, it was electric. She lit up the screen, stole every scene, and made history. When she walked on stage to accept the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, the second black woman in history to do so, the crowd erupted. But the smile on her face said more than the gold in her hand. She didn't take the stage for celebrity. She took it for every girl ever told she wasn't enough, but every triumph cast a longer shadow. Fame is a performance that never ends. The curtain doesn't drop, and off stage, the silence still followed her. The Color Purple made her great, Ghost made her global, but Sister Act made her immortal. In 1992, she became Dolores Van Cartier, the unbothered, glittering lounge singer turned unexpected nun. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural pulse. Families watched together, gospel met pop, faith met soul. The film made over $200 million, and the sequel sealed it in cinematic lore. Everywhere people danced, laughed, and sang. But Whoopi, she worked through exhaustion that money couldn't cure. She once said, "People think I'm always laughing. Truth is, I just don't always feel safe showing pain." Behind the camera, her days were 18 hours long. Behind the smile, there were still nights where she lay in hotel beds too tired to dream. She had given the world a reason to believe, but hadn't yet figured out how to hold that belief for herself. And then came Ted Danson, two megastars, one love story, caught in the crosshairs of a country still learning how to talk about race, power and partnership. Their romance sparked headlines, not because it blossomed, but because of the firestorm that followed. What began as affection turned into analysis. What should have been private became public battlefield. Every date became proof or problem, depending on who was watching. The relationship ended. The pressure crushed the promise. And for Whoopi, it was more than heartbreak. It was humiliation under floodlights. And yet, over and over she pressed forward. In 1994, she hosted the Academy Awards, solo. The first black woman to do so. She stood center stage, a symbol of gone too long exclusion, dressed in pride and armor. Critics dissected every syllable. But what they couldn't dissect was her stillness, how everything she'd lost had somehow made her presence even louder. As the years unfolded, she became more than an actress. She became a standard, a brand, but not one built for sale, one built for survival. Through Karina, The Little Rascals, Hollywood Squares, and eventually The View, Whoopi didn't just entertain, she endured. Not everyone understood her, but nobody could deny what she had done, transformed pain into permanence, laughter into legacy. Because while most stars chase perfection, she embraced truth, even when it trembled. In Hollywood, the spotlight burns bright, but it burns everything it touches. For Whoopi Goldberg, the fame that once lifted her became a cage, welded from expectations she never agreed to live under. By the mid-90s, her face was everywhere. Films, TV, magazine covers, award shows. Her voice was unmistakable, her presence undeniable. But behind all the presence was a woman growing tired of being watched, judged, categorized, and reduced to caricature. She had survived poverty, addiction, heartbreak, and more. But now came the quiet battles, the ones fought not in headlines, but in hotel rooms after the applause fades. Loneliness that crept in where love used to live, exhaustion settling in her bones, where performance once lived. She was working constantly, appearing in everything from box office hits to animated classics like Lion King and Toy Story 3, hosting award shows, producing series, voicing characters, taking every call, because when you've grown up with nothing, you never stop believing that everything can be taken back again. But in chasing it all, she never quite found rest. At home, her daughter Alex had begun growing into a woman of her own, a daughter Whoopi had once raised alone, hungry, scared, hoping she wouldn't pass down the weight she'd carried since Harlem. And yet fate, cruel in its symmetry, returned. At 16, Alex faced an unplanned pregnancy of her own. It was a full-circle moment, too heavy to process, too human to pretend. Whoopi, then in her 30s, found herself a grandmother before she'd even found consistent peace. And in that mirror of generational pain, something hardened in her, a sense that cycles don't just break, they have to be dismantled, brick by brick. So she doubled down, on work, on family, on purpose. She became a provider, a protector, a vault of experience no one had prepared her to carry. And somewhere between the red carpets and the birthday parties, she started disappearing into endurance. Her second and third marriages came and went like gusts of misguided timing. With David Clayson and Lyle Trachtenberg, it was never hate, it was the absence of fit. She said it herself, with brutal self-awareness, "I don't want someone in my house, I like having my own space." She wasn't cold, she was cautious. She had learned early, not every embrace is safe, not every vow means stability, and not every love story is a lifeline. Instead of relying on romantic love, she poured herself into causes, into activism, into speaking up for women who had no microphone, into defending artists sorted and shelved through systemic bias, into politics, passionately, messily, unapologetically, and into The View, the chair that would both define and defy her legacy. In 2007, she joined the panel on live daytime television, a place where filters couldn't protect her, where truth came raw, and judgment came faster than understanding. Whoopi didn't just take a seat, she planted a flag, sharp, witty, blunt, at times controversial, but never silent. In the years that followed, her words triggered think pieces and firestorms. She was called fearless by many, reckless by others. Whether discussing Mel Gibson, Bill Cosby, race, gender or justice, she spoke from her gut. And while not every opinion aged well, every one of them came from lived experience, not from strategy, but from scars. She made mistakes, she admitted them, she took hits that others avoided. She became once again, not just a performer, but a pressure point in the national conversation. People didn't just watch her to laugh, they watched to be challenged, to be pushed, or for some to be outraged. But they watched, and that's the price of having a voice in a country still learning how to listen. Through it all, she never quit, even when the backlash thundered louder than the applause, even when it would have been safer to say less. But silence was never the lane she chose. Behind the scenes, time was moving in other, darker ways. In 2010, the foundation of her world cracked apart. Emma Johnson, her mother, her rock, her original warrior, passed away. Not just a parent, but the scaffolding that had once held her up during the hungriest years. And there are some losses the heart cannot process, only carry. She didn't retreat after the funeral. She returned to work, to lights, to laughter. But those closest to her knew, it was never quite the same afterward. It couldn't be, because the applause was still there, but the person she wanted to hear it most wasn't. Grief softened some of her fire, but it sharpened her truth. It made every word on camera sit heavier in her throat. It made every fight for justice more personal. Fame now meant nothing if it couldn't bring back the ones she lost. And she knew then, more clearly than ever, that legacy wasn't about perfection, it was about perseverance. Loss has a way of rearranging everything. After Emma's death in 2010, Whoopi carried her grief the only way she knew how, by working. She returned to The View, her voice steady, her presence unchanged, outwardly. But inside, something vital had cracked. It wasn't just about missing her mother, it was about losing the one person who had known her before the world did, before the awards, before the scandals, before the hurt and healing. Emma had been her mirror, her anchor, her past, and then just 5 years later, fate struck again. In 2015, her only sibling, her brother Clyde, died unexpectedly. Suddenly the small family she had come from was gone. No parents, no brother, no more shared history to call and laugh with, no one who could finish her sentences from childhood, no one to say, "I remember." And for someone who spent her whole life telling stories, that kind of silence was suffocating. It changed her. Behind every joke, every bossy remark on The View, every cutting line that made headlines, there lived a grief that would not leave her side. She wasn't bitter, she was tired, but she kept showing up, because that's what survivors do. When everything falls, they still rise, and yet her body, like her heart, was breaking down. Years of pushing past the pain caught up with her. Long before public discussion, she battled endometriosis in silence. Like many women, she was misdiagnosed, ignored, told the pain was normal, but it wasn't. It bent her with each step, turned laughter into wincing, made performance feel like punishment. In 2018, the warning signs escalated: a persistent cough, fatigue, days when her breath felt too shallow. At first she brushed it off. Work waits for no one, especially a woman in Hollywood past 60. But then came the collapse. To pneumonia, raging in both lungs, sepsis in her blood, and just like that, Whoopi Goldberg, powerhouse, EGOT winner, cultural lightning rod, was fighting for her life. Doctors gave her a 30% chance of survival. She later said, "I came very close to leaving here, with the kind of stillness that doesn't need exaggeration." She spent weeks away from The View, absent from America's morning screens. Rumors swirled, but she wasn't hiding. She was healing, slowly, painfully, realizing that even if you've survived everything, childhood trauma, addiction, tabloid firestorms, you are still fragile, still mortal. The illness didn't just leave her weaker, it left her changed. When she returned to the show, thinner, cautiously smiling, she didn't pretend. She spoke openly. She didn't need pity, just honesty. "Every breath feels like a gift now," she said. And she meant it. But recovery isn't always complete. Even today, the breath sometimes takes longer. The fatigue sets in faster. She's lost weight, spoken out about wellness, clarified distortion. When companies tried to exploit her name in fake diet ads, she fights for clarity, with the same force she once fought for roles. Because now, her fight isn't just about legacy, it's about truth. She has become sharper but quieter, still opinionated, but more self-reflective. Instead of chasing acceptance, she cultivates peace. She retreats to her longtime home in West Orange, New Jersey, a sprawling estate surrounded by trees and history. Sometimes she escapes to Europe, where no one rushes her, where her name isn't carved into every headline. And there in the quiet she writes. She watches women's sports, especially after launching her new initiative to spotlight female athletes. She sketches, she cooks, she listens to music loud enough to drown out what the world demands of her. For the first time in decades, Whoopi isn't playing by anyone else's tempo, but even still, she shows up. Every weekday, chair pulled up to the round table, hair braided, shoulders set, opinions loaded. Because if anyone has earned the right to speak, it's her. Not because she's flawless, but because she's honest about her flaws. And if sometimes that honesty cuts too close, it's because it's real. She never claimed to be perfect. She claimed to be present. That's why people still watch, not just for the headlines, but for the humanity. To see someone who's climbed every mountain, only to find that some days, sitting still takes more courage. To witness a voice who once feared flying, now soaring in ways she never imagined. She doesn't call what she has now a victory. She calls it her quiet life. A life built not on applause, but after it. A life that understands the difference between surviving and living, and chooses both. The world still sees Whoopi Goldberg as larger than life, a voice that never wavers, a face that never fades, but they rarely see the weight she carries beneath that calm, sharp veneer, or the quieter truth she's come to embrace with age. That peace is what you fight hardest for.
once the battles are over. At 70, she's no longer chasing names on marquees or roles in blockbusters. Her worth isn't defined by box office numbers or critics' reviews. It's defined by mornings in her robe, sipping coffee on a quiet porch in New Jersey, by dinners where her grandchildren fill the house with sound, by the simplicity she was once too busy to notice and too exhausted to enjoy. The girl who once carried her baby on city buses, unsure how to feed her tomorrow, now watches that same daughter thrive, not only as a mother herself, but as her partner in projects, her producer, her protector. Through Alex, Whoopi became a grandmother in her early 30s, and now, a great-grandmother. It's a dynasty born not of luxury, but of strength, stitched together by generations of survival. At family gatherings, she's not Whoopi of The View, not Oda Mae, not Dolores, in a habit. She's just grandma. And for all the applause and gold statues she's amassed, nothing seems to light her from within like a baby's laugh in her arms. Life has taught her that the greatest role you play is the one where no one watches, and where love is the only director, and love for her is no longer romantic. She shed that expectation, not because she doesn't believe in it, but because she finally believes in herself enough not to need it. She tried marriage 3 times. She loved, sure, but she also conformed to what she thought was required, what society whispered was right. But in the end, she woke up next to men and felt more alone than ever. It wasn't failure, it was misalignment, a kind of loneliness that only silence can truly expose. She said it best herself, "I don't want someone in my house." It's not bitterness, it's clarity. Some people are built for coexistence, others are built for independence, and few people know this more intimately than a woman who spent decades being everything to everyone else, while quietly wondering when she'd get just be herself. So now, she chooses solitude. Not absence, not isolation, just space. Space to breathe, to live without compromise, to think without interruption, to just be. She maintains a home not only in Jersey, but in Sardinia, Italy, perched high above the sea, where no one expects her to be funny. There she walks slowly through markets, reads, listens to jazz, sketches, lights candles for family long gone, cries when she wants to, laughs without pretense. That villa, surrounded by cliffs that took eons to form, reminds her every time she looks out the window. Strength doesn't need to shout, sometimes it just needs to endure. But peace, of course, doesn't erase the past. She remembers every stumble, every word that cut deeper than she meant it to, every headline that butchered nuance, controversies on air, misunderstandings, regrets. She doesn't pretend none of it hurt. She just no longer lives under that weight, because she's also learned the bigger truth, something only age teaches. You aren't your mistakes, you are what you do next. And she, time and time again, chose to return, to grow, to own her flaws. That's what makes her real, not the perfection, the persistence. She's given millions away quietly, behind the noise. Women's health clinics, LGBTQ+ causes, arts education, support for addiction recovery, AIDS awareness back when no one else would touch it. Never filmed, never tweeted, just done, because compassion should never require an audience. And she's still building, she's still dreaming. Sister Act 3 is in development. Her own women's sports network is preparing to spotlight voices long ignored. She's writing more, advising more, giving her time to people and platforms that push the world forward. Because that's what she's always wanted, not just to be seen, but to make someone else feel less alone in the process. And if she's learned anything from her 7 decades here, on Earth, on stages, on sets, in hospital beds, on rooftops beneath firelit skies, it's this: success without inner peace is just another kind of poverty. Fame without family is a well of echoes, and legacy only matters if it leaves behind comfort, strength, truth, and love. And that, more than any film, any award, any gold statue, is what she's devoted her final chapters to. Not being remembered, but being real. There's a moment few speak of, the moment after the noise dies, when the lights dim, when the crowd goes home, and all that's left is your own breath, echoing in a quiet room. For Whoopi Goldberg, that's where the truth has always lived, not in the applause, but in the after, because the applause fades, it always does. The trophies tarnish, the headlines vanish, and the world moves on. But the feeling, the impact, The way a single performance, a single sentence, a single laugh sparked something in someone else's heart that stays. You can chart her victories on paper. EGOT winner. Dozens of blockbuster films, hit TV shows, iconic characters, historic firsts. You can trace her influence like a constellation across 4 decades of American culture. And yes, you can also count the controversies, the stumbles, the misstatements, the failures, because Whoopi Goldberg gave the world her whole self, not just the polished icon, but the flawed, fierce, complex human being beneath it. And maybe that's why we're still talking about her. She never pretended to be a saint, but she refused to be a stereotype. A loud black woman, a funny sidekick, a safe smiling face. She challenged people. She made them uncomfortable. She dared to speak when silence would have been safer. And whether or not you agreed with what she said, she meant it, every time. That honesty, sometimes messy, sometimes jagged, is what made her real. And real lasts longer than flawless, because real makes space for everyone else to be human too. That's the quiet brilliance of Whoopi Goldberg. She took the bruises life gave her, poverty, dyslexia, addiction, abandonment, criticism, illness, loneliness, and turned them into art, into armor, into empathy. She didn't hide her scars. She lit them up on stage, and dared the world to look. And in doing so, she gave permission to millions more to show their own. Whoopi made it okay to be complicated, and being complicated is another way of saying alive. There are few people left in this business who've walked through as many decades, eras, and revolutions as she has, and still remain distinctly, unapologetically themselves. But perhaps that's because Whoopi never tried to conform to where culture was going. She shaped it as she went, in sneakers instead of heels, with jokes instead of apologies, with truth instead of perfection. Now at 70, she carries a different fire. Less about being loud, more about being rooted. She's not chasing attention, she's choosing intention. Fewer films, more meaning. Fewer interviews, more impact. And while some judge that as slowing down, it's really something else entirely. It's settling into wisdom, a wisdom earned in sweat, in sleepless nights, in airplanes she was once too scared to board, and stages she once dreamed she'd never reach. And that wisdom now lives in every room she steps into, in her glances, her timing, the stories she chooses to tell, the moments she now cherishes more than anything, a quiet dinner with family, a worn hardcover book, a photograph on a mantle, a song from the past, a sunset that no camera's rolling to catch. Because the final miracle of Whoopi Goldberg's life isn't what she built. It quotes what she let herself become. Soft but unbreakable, grounded but not hardened, present but not performative, and at peace with a life that wasn't clean or perfect or effortless, but was unequivocally hers. For those watching from afar, she is still the sister act icon, the voice from Ghost, the rebel on The View, the center stage brilliance in The Color Purple. But for those who've paid closer attention, she is so much more. She is proof that greatness doesn't require perfection, that victory can grow out of pain, that legacy isn't built in moments, it's built in the aftermath, in how you rise after the fall, in how you speak even when your voice shakes, in how you keep walking, even when the world tells you to sit down. And maybe most of all, she's proof that being human, in all its messy, unscripted glory, is enough. So if you ever laughed at one of her lines, cried during one of her films, nodded in agreement, or shook your head in disagreement, if you've connected with her fire, her flaw, her fight, then her story has already touched yours. Because Whoopi's life is no fairy tale, it's a battle cry, and an invitation. To speak, to stay standing. To rise again.